Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Guild Noctis video, where today I'm going to be completing the game using only Ice types. And while the Ice type does suffer from a lot of issues defensively, I think that it's going to do very well overall. Many of the bosses in this game don't actually handle the Ice type all that well, and those that do are weak to their secondary typings on a lot of these Pokemon, so I think that it's not going to really struggle too much, but we're just going to have to see. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into it. And so, the first thing we need to do is, of course, choose our first Pokemon through a spin of the wheel. And you might already notice that one Pokemon is missing. I'll get to why in just a bit, but for now, our first Pokemon is Sneasle, which is honestly a very good Pokemon. When I used it in the past, it surprised me quite a lot. So, with that, let's go ahead and go over its stats. Sneasle has 55 HP, 95 attack, 55 defense, 35 special attack, 75 special defense, and 115 speed, and gets access to mostly normal dark and ice type moves, but it does get Shadow Ball and Brick Break, which could come in handy. Now, one thing to note about Sneasle is that it is one of the few physical attacking ice types, which does make it a bit special in that regard. However, both ice and dark are special attacking types in this generation, so unfortunately it won't be able to get stab on its better attack stat. But anyway, with that, let's go ahead and move on to our Sneasle in particular, which has a naughty nature, raising its attack but lowering its special defense. And because it's a bit of a glass cannon, this is honestly alright. I'm not going to be able to survive as long, but I'll be dealing more damage. It gets the Inner Focus ability, which prevents flinching, which could come in handy. And at level 10, it gets the moves Scratch, Leer, Taunt, and Quick Attack. So with that, we of course move on, and the first thing we need to do is go pick up our second Shadow Pokemon, which in this case is Delibird because it's the easier of the two in getting and port to get. And once it's got, we go ahead and spin the wheel once again. And honestly, all the Pokemon here would be pretty good. Well, except for Delibird, of course. But honestly, I'm kind of glad I got Delibird this early because there's really not a better chance to use it. So let's go ahead and look at its stats. It has 45 HP, 55 attack, 45 defense, 65 special attack, 45 special defense, and 75 speed, and gets access to one move, that being Present. Now luckily it does get access to TMs and tutor moves, but unfortunately most of those are inaccessible at this point in the game, other than Seismic Toss and Mimic, which I wouldn't want to teach Delibird just in case I need one of those moves later in the game. But for now, I think Delibird is going to be a fine Pokemon. So with that, we go ahead and move on to our Delibird, who has a careful nature, raising its special defense but lowering its special attack. It's an okay nature, I guess. It's only using a physical move anyway, so it's not really going to hurt anything. It gets access to the Vital Spirit ability, which prevents it from falling asleep, which could come in handy. And it, of course, only gets the move Present. So with that, we go ahead and move on, and we pick up the final Shadow Pokemon I can get before we get out of the early game. And so it's time to see who is the last member of our trio, and it is Lapras, which is going to be very nice because neither of our two Pokemon right now are all that bulky, so it is going to be a very good addition. So with that, let's go ahead and go over its stats. It has 130 HP, 85 attack, 80 defense, 85 special attack, 95 special defense, and 60 speed, and gets access to mostly normal water and ice type moves. And it also gets access to Thunderbolt and Thunder, which could be very helpful for getting rid of the water types that resist both of its stab options. So I think that Lapras is probably going to be one of the, if not the best ice type Pokemon in this entire run. So I'm glad I got it early so I can dedicate more experience to it to hopefully get it to a higher level by the end of the game. So with that, we move on to our Lapras in particular, which has a timid nature, raising its speed but lowering its attack, which is honestly a great nature for Lapras because its only real issue is that it's kind of slow. It gets access to the Water Absorb ability, which converts any water type damage it takes into HP that restores a quarter of its max HP, which is very helpful for its survivability. And it gets access to Water Gun, Growl, Sing, and Mist by level 10. So with that, we move on to the battle against the old man. He leads with an Abra and a Horsey, and honestly, this team of three shouldn't really have too many issues here. I mean, Abra's not really that much of a threat because I outspeed it, and while it's not a one-shot, I do deal quite a bit of damage. Horsey is of course very defensive, however, just after a couple of quick attacks and a Present, it should be enough to take it down. I decided to swap into Lapras now, that way it can get some experience off the Horsey but I do misjudge just how much damage I was doing with Sneasle, so it does survive on just a little bit of HP, though it really doesn't matter because it goes down this turn anyway before attacking. And then all that's left is the Shroomish, and honestly the Shroomish can't really do anything to us. The only thing it's really got is Effect Spore, but even if it did happen, it wouldn't cause too much issue. So with that, it goes down and we beat the old man. And I move on to the Pokemart where I pick up Vivid Sense to purify my Teddiursa, and unfortunately, I sell the Water Stone. So I go back to before I fought the old man and did the battle all over again. And I did the correct thing and sell the Bullet Seed TM, which I always do, but for some reason I didn't this time. But anyway, I move on to the Blue Power Ranger, and it's not because I have any distinct advantage against him. It's because his Shadow Pokemon is our next Pokemon, the one that was omitted from the wheel, and that is Sneasle. And because it actually takes a very long time for me to catch this, I think I'm going to go ahead and start the rambling now. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now this playthrough has actually been done for quite a while now. I think I did this at the beginning of September, and the plan was to release it I think in early October, but the thing is with December just a couple months away, I went ahead and pushed it off until now. And the other thing I want to note is that I know I didn't upload anything last week, and that's because I was using all that time for prep on this week and next week for something bigger. So anyway, with that, we finally catch our Sneasle, and we beat Blue, and then we move on to Sneasle's stats. It has 70 HP, 40 attack, 50 defense, 55 special attack, 50 special defense, and 25 speed, and when it evolves into Celio, it has 90 HP, 60 attack, 70 defense, 75 special attack, 70 special defense, and 45 speed. And when it finally becomes Walrein, it has 110 HP, 80 attack, 90 defense, 95 special attack, 90 special defense, and 65 speed. And it gets access to mostly normal and ice type moves, though it does get a few water type moves, as well as Earthquake, which could be nice. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to our Sneasle in particular, which has a lonely nature, raising its attack but lowering its defense, which definitely isn't a great nature for it, but it at least has a solid attacking stat, so it's not terrible. It gets access to the Thick Fed ability, which gives it a 50% resistance to both fire and ice type moves, which does get rid of its fire neutrality, and because it was a Shadow Pokemon, it gets Aurora Beam Charm, Water Slam, and Body Slam, which the only reason it has Body Slam is because I purified it, and so I got rid of Mud Slap for it. Anyway, with that, at level 13, Lapras gets Body Slam, which I teach over Growl, and at level 15, Sneasle gets Screech, which I teach over Scratch. And I go ahead and pick up my next Shadow Pokemon, that way I can spin the wheel once again. And I think that maybe just a bit more damage would be nice, and I get Swinub. And while it's not a huge damage dealer just yet, when it evolves into Piloswine, it will be doing quite a bit more. Now, similar to Sneasle, it's one of the only physical attacking ice types, and it has 50 HP, 50 attack, 40 defense, 30 special attack, 30 special defense, and 50 speed. And when it evolves, it'll have 100 HP, 100 attack, 80 defense, 60 special attack, 60 special defense, and 50 speed. And through a level up, it gets access to mostly normal and ice type moves, which isn't great. However, it does get the TM for Earthquake, and with it being a strong physical attacker and also ground type, that is going to be doing quite a bit of damage. Now, I am able to catch a Shadow Swinub a bit later in the game, and this one is very tempting, so I do have it here just in case I do decide to pick it up. But many of the ice types do actually have Shadow variants that I'm not going to put on there simply because it's just not worthwhile picking them up that late in the game. Anyway, with that, we go ahead and move on to our Swinub, which has a hasty nature, raising its speed but lowering its defense, and while it is very slow, losing that defense could hurt us quite a bit. It has the Oblivious ability, which prevents attraction, which could come in handy, and it gets Tackle, Odor Sleuth, and Powder Snow by level 14. So with that, we go ahead and move on, and I go out of my way to go ahead and purify the Sneasle. That's when it would have gotten Body Slam. And I pick up our next Shadow Pokemon. That way I can spin the wheel again, and honestly, at the moment, we kind of are just lacking a bit in the speed department, so luckily Smoochum is there to pick up the slack. So let's go over their stats. Smoochum has 45 HP, 30 attack, 15 defense, 85 special attack, 65 special defense, and 65 speed. And Jynx has 65 HP, 50 attack, 35 defense, 115 special attack, 95 special defense, and 95 speed. And they get access to a wide variety of moves, including Ice, Normal, Dark, Ghost, Fighting, Water, and Psychic. And I do think that while Jynx is going to do very well because of that psychic typing, unfortunately it's incredible frailty on the physical side, as well as not having a great stab ice option other than Blizzard through level up could hold it back. But anyway, let's go and move on to our Smoochum, which has a jolly nature, raising its speed but lowering its special attack. That's definitely not a great nature for it. However, there is that small chance that something could outspeed it, especially later in the game. It gets the Oblivious ability, which prevents attraction, and it gets Pound, Lick, Sweet Kiss, and Powder Snow. So with that, we pick up our next Shadow Pokemon, and we spin the wheel once again. Now down to only 3 options, and unfortunately, there is one on here that I don't think is nearly as good as the other 2, and that is, of course, Snorunt. Now, even though I do really like Snorunt as a Pokemon, unfortunately, it has 50 in all of its stats, making it mediocre at just about everything, and when it evolves at level 42, it goes up to 80, which is quite a bit nicer, and it allows it to do everything, but it doesn't really exceed at anything. And so we move over to its moves, and it gets mostly Ice, Dark, and Normal type moves, as well as Earthquake and Shadow Ball, and Light Screen, which could be good, but unfortunately it just kind of falls behind a lot of the other ice types. Even though I really do like Snorunt, I'm not sure if I'm really going to use it. It has a jolly nature, raising its speed but lowering its special attack, and it has the ability Inner Focus, which prevents flinching, and then by level 15 it gets Powder Snow, Leer, Double Team, and Bite. So we go ahead and catch the Shroomish, and we are going to spin the wheel one last time. And even though both of these Pokemon are good, I think I'd prefer one over the other, and that is Shelder. And that's because Shelder actually evolves with a Water Stone, meaning that I can evolve it anytime I want. But anyway, let's go and move on to their stats. Shelder has 30 HP, 65 attack, 100 defense, 45 special attack, 25 special defense, and 40 speed. And when it evolves into Cloyster, it has 50 HP, 95 attack, 180 defense, 85 special attack, 45 special defense, and 70 speed. And I've just now realized while recording this that I accidentally flipped the stat spreads. Anyway, moving on, because Shelder is a Waterstone evolution, I went ahead and cut off the leveled up learn set whenever I evolved it, which is right after Aurora Beam, so it gets normal water and ice type moves. And Cloyster is very nice because it has 180 defense. Now its special defense is really bad, but it should have many opportunities to use that huge defense stat. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and move on to Shelder, who has a quirky nature, which is a neutral nature. And it has the Shell Armor ability, which prevents critical hits, also helping its huge defense, and it gets Tackle, Withdraw, and Supersonic by level 15. Now, at this point, I do have over 6 Pokemon, so I do need to decide who stays and who goes, and unfortunately, Snorunt and Delibird just do not make the team. So with that, we go ahead and move on to the first boss of the game, Walrein I. She leads with a Beautifly and a Love Disc. And I decide to lead with Sneasle and Lapras. I go for Body Slam with Lapras, hoping for a Paralysis on Love Disc, though I don't get it, but it does deal a little bit of damage. And I go for Aurora Beam, which does quite a bit of damage to Beautifly, but not quite a one-shot, though it did get an attack drop. But now that I know that Lapras outspeeds Beautifly, I finish it off with a Body Slam, and then out comes Roselia, who's going to take the Aurora Beam, dealing over half of its health. I go for Body Slam into it, and it finishes it off. And then she sends out her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Delcatty. Now, I could catch this Delcatty to get Seal, but I'm actually going to hold off on getting Seal, because I'm going to catch the Shadow variant of it, and it'd be a bit redundant to put experience into something that I'm just going to replace later anyway. With all that being said, we slowly whittle down her Delcatty, and it gets a crit taking out Sneasle, which is a bit unfortunate because I just swapped out Lapras. I go for Quick Attack, which doesn't quite finish it off. Water Gun, really not doing that much damage, but Shadow Rush finishes off Shelder. I send out Smoochum, and I go for another Quick Attack, which finishes off the Delcatty with a crit. And then all that's left is the Love Disc, and even though all of my Pokemon aren't going to deal that much damage, Love Disc can't really do anything to me either, so eventually I will take it down. It does just take a few turns, and Smoochum gets a crit, speeding that up just a little more because it's left on a sliver, and Smoochum finishes it off. So, an easy first try victory. Now, of course, you can't have a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video without the obligatory Mirror B. How are you doing today, Mirror B? Well, that's always good to hear, but we actually need you today. But first, at level 19, Lapras gets Confuse Ray, which I decide to teach over Sing, and then I go ahead and catch his Voltorb, which is holding the Magnet item, raising electric type damage by 10%. And then at level 17, Shelter gets Aurora Beam, and now that it has Aurora Beam, it's finally time to evolve it into Cloyster, which is going to be a huge upgrade for it, and at the same time, it's also going to gain the Ice typing. Soon after, I pick up the Ralts for the Twisted Spoon item, raising Psychic type damage by 10%, and then I go to the Real Game Tower to go pick up my two favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect, and unfortunately, in buying those, I actually run out of money. So I only have two of each, so I decide to teach Hidden Power to Cloyster and Smoochum. And Cloyster gets Hidden Power Fighting, which honestly isn't that bad of a hidden power type because it is more of a physical attacker. Unfortunately, it is only 34 base power, so it's actually not going to be all that useful. And Smoochum gets hidden power water with only 48 base power, but it is still at least something. Now moving on, I go ahead and pick up the Swine up here because it's holding the Never Melt Ice item, but also because it might be worthwhile to switch our Swine up for it. And even though I do decide to go for it, there is one small downside, and that is the fact that I am still broke and can't actually buy any of the Vivid Sense to purify it easily. So it is going to be a Shadow Pokemon for a little while. And we finally pick up our final Ice type, Sneasle. Well, actually, it's not an Ice type just yet, but when it evolves into Dewgong, it will be. So with that, let's go ahead and go over its stats. Sneasle has 65 HP, 45 attack, 55 defense, 45 special attack, 70 special defense, and 45 speed. And when it evolves into Dewgong, it has 90 HP, 70 attack, 80 defense, 70 special attack, 95 special defense, and 70 speed. And through level up, they get access to normal ice and water type moves, which isn't all that great. But what Sneasle has going for it is the fact that whenever you purify it, it comes with the move Surf. And in this game, because HMs don't exist, you don't actually get access to the move Surf any other way. So I'm really hoping that Dewgong is going to be very helpful throughout this entire run. Our Sneasle in particular has a bashful nature, which is a neutral nature, though I think that's fine. It gets access to the Thick Fat ability just like Sneasle did, giving it a 50% damage reduction on both ice and fire type moves, and by purifying it, which I haven't done just yet, but when it does, it'll have Surf, Helping Hand, Safeguard, and Ice Beam. Oh, and I forgot to mention, but the other thing that makes it really nice is because there's only one Ice Beam TM, and Sneasle just gets it by being purified, I don't have to waste it on it. Anyway, with that, we move on to the battle against Sneasle. He leads with a Lantern and a Quagsire, and I go for Aurora Beam at Body Slam into the Quagsire right away, which unfortunately, Body Slam really doesn't do that much damage to it, though I am hoping that it might be paralyzed. Swinub takes a Rock Tomb, though luckily it is one of the few Pokemon on my team that is at least neutral to it. And then Shockwave from the Lantern does quite a bit of damage, and Lapras nearly gets taken down by a Rock Tomb. Shadow Wave really doesn't do that much damage, and another Shockwave finishes off Lapras. I send out Sneasle because at this moment it is still neutral to Rock Tomb as well, but unfortunately Quagsire just goes for Water Gun, taking down Swinub. I go for Aurora Beam and Shadow Wave, but unfortunately Sneasle goes down to a crit Shockwave, taking it down in a single hit. Aurora Beam hits, not really doing that much damage. Rock Tomb finishes off Smoochum in a single hit, and then all that's left is Cloyster, which, with a very pitiful special defense stat, unfortunately doesn't do much. So I go out of my way to go purify both Sneasle and the Swinub, now seeing that the Swinub has a quirky nature, which is a neutral nature, making it slightly worse than the other Swinub we had, but I think in the long run it's going to be better. And at level 26, Sneasle gets Ice Beam, which I decide to teach over Aurora Beam, and then I go over to the Tutor Lady to go pick up the move Body Slam and put it onto our new Swinub, and then I attempt the battle against Sneasle once again. This time I decide to lead Swinub and Sneasle, and I go for Mudshot and Surf. Mudshot does do super effective damage against the Lantern, which is nice, however it also lowers its speed. So if Swinub does go down, at least the Pokemon coming out behind it should be able to outspeed and finish it off. Sneasle's speed is lowered, I go for another Mudshot, taking Lantern down to low yellow, and it hits a Water Gun, taking Swinub down in a single hit. So I decide to send out Lapras, which luckily works in my favor because Quagsire was trying to take it down as well. I go for another Surf, chipping Lantern down even lower. Body Slam finishes it off, and then he sends out his Shadow Lunatone, which is going to be a bit of a threat, though hopefully Surf, never mind, Sneasle goes down. So unfortunately I won't be able to deal just a little bit of chip damage before it's able to attack on the next turn. Water Gun does take it nearly to half, it's able to set up Shadow Sky. Rock Tomb comes out dealing quite a bit of damage to Sneasle. I go for Ice Beam, taking it down to low yellow, and I get a lucky freeze. So I'm hoping that as long as it doesn't thaw out quickly, I'll be able to take down the Quagsire first, because it is being a nuisance in this fight, dealing super effective damage with Rock Tomb and lowering our speed. So unfortunately, not quite enough to finish it off, though the Fruity Pebbles do the job. Sneasle survives on 1 HP, which is very nice, and then out comes Castform. And at this point, I decide to take down the Shadow Lunatone with Water Gun, which sends out his final Pokemon, a Metang. Though I think in hindsight, I really should have taken down the Castform at this point because it does have Shockwave, and I decided to use Charm into the Castform, that way it wouldn't use Weather Ball, because now that the Shadow Sky is set, it's going to be a typeless 100 base power move. But it's just going for Shockwave anyway, so maybe I might have wasted a turn there. And then it gets a crit, taking Lapras down to low health. I send out Cloyster after Smoochum goes down to a single Metal Claw. Though I do think that I'm still in a pretty good position. I go for Body Slam, taking Castform down to low yellow. Shockwave hits, finishing off the Lapras, and Aurora Beam takes down the Castform. All that's left is a Metang, and unfortunately, Thunder Punch nearly takes me down from full health. I miss a Supersonic and go down. So with that, I decide to do a little bit of extra training and finish Mount Battle Area 2. That way I can pick up the TM for Water Pulse and teach it to Cloyster, because throughout these many attempts, Cloyster is actually getting right to the end, but unfortunately it doesn't really do any damage. And I decide to go back to the Rail Gap Tower to go pick up Light Screen to teach to Smoochum. That way I can use it as a lead to lower the amount of damage I'm taking overall. And even though Smoochum is probably going to go down on the first turn anyway, it should be able to set up a Light Screen before it goes down, which will help the rest of the team. Now unfortunately, I didn't account for the fact that Lantern might be faster and takes down Swinub in a single hit. Definitely not a great start to the battle. I send out Sneasle and Lapras, and I go for Body Slam into the Lantern, still not doing that much damage, though I do get a lucky paralysis. And Quagsire misses a Rock Tomb, and because the Lantern is paralyzed, I actually decide to switch targets to take down the Quagsire first, because it lowering our speed is very annoying. Luckily, I do get a crit with Ice Beam, taking it down in just a single turn, and then out comes the Shadow Lunatone. Shockwave nearly takes Sneasle down, but it survives on just a little bit of HP. I go for Water Gun, still doing about a third. It's able to set up Shadow Sky. I go for Ice Beam, taking it down to yellow, and hopefully it's just enough for Lapras to finish off with another Water Gun. And if it is, the Castform will be taking an Ice Beam, dealing quite a bit more damage. Lunatone goes down, and Castform nearly takes half its health and damage, and it gets a freeze. So now Castform is out of commission, hopefully for a few turns at the very least. Sneasle goes down, Lantern takes a little bit of extra chip damage, and now I send out Cloyster. Unfortunately, I don't really have a good way to deal with Lantern with these two, so I decide to set up Confuse Ray, hoping that'll hit itself to deal a little bit extra damage for me, and Hidden Power does a little bit. Unfortunately, Lantern is able to get through both the confusion and the paralysis, and with Light Screen down, it deals quite a bit of damage. But I'm already a couple turns into Castform's freeze, so I decide to take it down now, and I'm glad I did, because it's able to defrost and start attacking, which luckily doesn't take down the Cloyster, though it does get fairly close. Lantern hits itself in confusion. Fruity Pebbles come down, and both of my Pokemon are able to survive. Lantern is just on a sliver, and I go for Confuse Ray into the Metang, hoping it'll hit itself, and Water Pulse, which doesn't deal as much damage as I was hoping it would. Lantern's able to use another Shockwave, finishing off Cloyster, and I send out my final Pokemon, Sneasle, and the Shadow Sky has faded. Now luckily Lapras was able to survive. I go for Body Slam to finish off the Lantern, and then all that's left is Metang, which finishes off Lapras. I go for Surf, and it's actually dealing quite a bit of damage now that it's a single target, and with just a couple of them, Metang goes down. So with that, at level 21, Smoochum gets Confusion, which I decide to teach over Lick, though very soon after I actually get the TM for Psychic, which I decide to teach over Confusion, and then very soon after, Sneasle learns Rest at level 29, which I decide to teach over Safeguard, and then I go into the battle against Gonzap. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf, and on the first turn, the Nuzleaf is always going to go for Fake Out, and because we're a lot of water types, Electrode's always going to go for Spark. Unfortunately, coming into this battle, Sneasle is already very low, and Lapras is paralyzed because of the Fortress in the previous fight. So unfortunately, Sneasle goes down to a single Spark, and Hyper Beam does quite a bit to Lapras, where it finally gets to move, hitting a Body Slam and paralyzing Nuzleaf, so it will be able to act before it and finish it off. Though unfortunately, it's not going to get much further than that, because the Spark finishes off Lapras. So before I go back into it again, I decide to teach Protect over Mist, and do a little bit of extra training to get Sneasle to evolve into Dewgong, which on top of giving it the ice typing also makes it quite a bit bulkier, so that should definitely help in this fight. And looking at the levels my Pokemon are right now, I decided to do a little bit of extra training at Mount Battle, and at level 31, Lapras gets the move Ice Beam, which I teach over Confuse Ray, and then soon after, Sneasle evolves into Celio, which is definitely going to help quite a bit as well. So now with all the preparations done, I go back into the battle against Gonzap, and I lead with Lapras and Swinub, and on the first turn, unfortunately Swinub does get hit by the Fake Out, but it doesn't really matter too much because Lapras uses Protect, so it doesn't take any damage on the first turn. And then I get a lucky freeze on Electrode, which is very nice. I go for Mud Shot, not quite enough to finish it off, though it is close enough to finish it off on the following turn. I go for Ice Beam to take down the Nuzleaf in a single hit, the then sends out Vileplume. Ancient Power takes down the Electrode, and I get a lucky 10% Omni Boost, raising all my stats by one stage. I go for Body Slam into the Whiscash, and I go for Ice Beam into Vileplume, which Ice Beam is able to finish it off in a single hit. And then out comes this final Pokemon, a Skarmory. I go for Body Slam, which does almost nothing to Whiscash, even with that attack boost, and Swinub goes down to a single Water Pulse. I send out Dewgong, and go for Surf and Ice Beam to take down the Whiscash, because it is a very tanky Pokemon. Even with the two of them attacking, it's not quite enough. Hyper Beam hits Dewgong, not really doing that much damage, and another Hyper Beam takes me down to low yellow. Go for an Ice Beam to take the Skarmory down low, and Surf finishes it off. So with that, we beat Gonzap, and now we move on to Smoochum evolving into Jynx. Unfortunately, throughout most of this run, Smoochum really hasn't done that much, but now that it's a Jynx, it's going to be dealing a ton of damage, and outspeeding a lot of threats that many of the other Pokemon can't. At the same time, Swinub finally evolves into Piloswine, which is definitely helpful as well, because it is our strongest physical attacker. And because of that, it's time to pick up the move Earthquake at the top of the pyramid, which I decide to teach over Mudshot. And then we go into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Celio of his own and a Lairon. I go for Body Slam into the Celio, not really doing too much damage, and Ancient Power, which is super effective, though it still doesn't do that much damage either. Earthquake, also not doing that much damage to our two Pokemon. And so I go for Protect, go for Earthquake, which takes down the Lairon in a single hit, finishes off the Celio with a crit, though it definitely wasn't necessary. Then out comes Slowking and Ursaring. I go for Ancient Power and Body Slam into the Slowking, which Body Slam gets a crit, taking it down to half. Ancient Power really not doing that much damage. Another Earthquake coming back at us. I go for another Earthquake and Protect, which should be able to finish off Slowking, but unfortunately I don't go down to Protect, instead going for Body Slam, which unfortunately means Lapras gets hit by the Earthquake. So definitely a misclick there. Then out comes the Shadow Primeape. Brick Break takes down Piloswine, but I think that's kind of alright, because now I can send out Jynx to take down the Primeape, but unfortunately Primeape actually outspeeds and takes it down in a single hit. Okay, well that's not great. I send out Cloyster, go for Ice Beam, which doesn't quite finish off the Ursaring, so it gets another Brick Break into Lapras. And at this point, Lapras is more than likely going down, so I decide to use Aurora Beam to take down the Ursaring. I switch into Dewgong, which unfortunately takes a Brick Break, dealing half its health. Aurora Beam finishes off the Ursaring, sending out his final Shadow Pokemon, which is a Shadow Hypno. Now unfortunately, this is extremely bulky, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to take it down very easily. A Shadow Rush takes Dewgong down to 14, I go for Surf, not really doing that much damage to either of them. And Shadow Storm comes out, taking Cloyster down to 21 HP and finishing off the Dewgong. Aurora Beam, not really doing that much to Primeape either, but unfortunately it's its best option right now, so I go for another one, and an unfortunate crit is able to take the Celio down to 6, and another Shadow Storm finishes off with a crit. So I go back into the battle once again. This time I go with Piloswine and Celio, and I go for Ancient Power into the Celio right away, as well as Body Slam, taking it down to low yellow. They both take an Earthquake, but that's alright. And I go for Earthquake and realize that I forgot to teach Celio Protect. So unfortunately it is going to have to take an Earthquake, and it actually does much more damage than I expected, so that's not great. Out comes the Slowking and the Ursaring once again. Go for Ice Beam into the Ursaring, dealing quite a bit of damage to it. Hopefully that'll be enough for the next Pokemon to take it down. I double Body Slam into Slowking, which nearly takes it to half and gets a lucky Paralysis. Earthquake comes out, finishing off Celio, though I think that's probably good at this point. I send out Cloyster, because it has such a high defense stat, it should be able to survive an Earthquake from Piloswine, and possibly even an attack from Ursaring. I go for Earthquake, and it actually does half of Cloyster's health. Brick Break takes Piloswine down to 6. Aurora Beam does finish off Ursaring, so he sends out his Shadow Primeape once again. Water Pulse finishes off Piloswine, and unfortunately, because Jynx doesn't outspeed the Primeape, I actually decide to go over to Lapras, which still doesn't feel all that great because Primeape is going to deal quite a bit of damage to it, but it actually decides to go for Shadow Storm this turn, which I'm assuming is because the Cloyster was there. Go for Ice Beam, dealing nearly half to it, and luckily Slowking decided to go for Earthquake, so I will be able to finish off Primeape on this next turn, even though I will take a little bit of extra damage from it. Dewgong gets taken down a half, go for Surf, taking Slowking down, and Primeape follows with the other half of Surf. And then out comes the final Pokemon, the Shadow Hypno once again, Ice Beam into it. Not really doing that much damage, go for another Ice Beam and Surf because they are my best moves. And even though it does take a few turns, I am able to slowly take it down, and it can't really do anything against me. So with that, we beat Gorgon, and now we move on to the final area of the game. Now unfortunately they are starting to fall behind a bit in terms of the team runs, though I do think that the final area of the game is probably the best for them. So let's go ahead and go into the first battle against Lavrina. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis. I go for Protect and Earthquake. And luckily, none of them decide to attack the Piloswine. It does have to both. Now I can either flip a coin on Protect or just go for a double Body Slam. I decide to go for Body Slams, which is able to take down the Gorbis. And then she sends out her next Pokemon, which is Roselia. And Roselia really doesn't do much here, so I decide to focus on taking down the Gardevoir. And Ice Beam finishes it off, sending out her first Shadow Pokemon, which is a Shadow Farfetch'd. And it has the move Shadow Panic, which causes confusion, and while it's not completely accurate, Farfetch seems to hit it more often than not, so I really want it gone as soon as possible. Though, at this point, I decide to take down Roselia first. Hopefully Piloswine outspeeds, and she sends out her final Pokemon, which is Shadow Altaria. Unfortunately, Piloswine does not outspeed, and so it hits itself in confusion and goes down to Leech Seed. I send out Jynx, that way I know for a fact I can go faster. And I go for Psychic, taking it down with a crit, though it definitely wasn't necessary. Altaria goes for Shadow Mist, lowering my evasiveness, though that doesn't really matter. Ice Beam finishes off Altaria, and we beat Lavrina on the first attempt. At level 39, Celio gets the move Rest, which I decide to teach over Water Gun, though in hindsight maybe I should have kept Water Gun because soon after Lapras gets the move Rain Dance, which I also decide to teach over the move Water Gun, which is definitely a mistake, but we move on. Celio evolves into Walrein, and soon after Jynx gets the move Fake Tears, which I decide to teach over Powder Snow because it synergizes well with the rest of the team, lowering special defense. And then, right before the next battle, I decide to teach Thunderbolt to Lapras over Body Slam. I go into the battle against Sneasle, he leads with a Quagsire and a Metang, and I decide to lead with Jynx and Walrein because Jynx does a good amount of neutral damage with Psychic, and Quagsire goes down to Walrein's Ice Beam. Then out comes Scizor. Now unfortunately Jynx doesn't do very well against Scizor, so I decide to go for Fake Tears to lower its special defense. That way I can take it down a bit easier with the rest of my team. But unfortunately, neither of Snattle's Pokemon decide to attack Jynx and finish it off, so I'm forced to finish off Scizor with a Psychic, and then send out the Shadow Solrock. I go for Ice Beam into it, nearly taking it down in a single hit, and Metang unfortunately gets a paralysis with Thunder Punch. So I'm able to finish off the Solrock and send out his next Pokemon, the Cast Form, but unfortunately Jynx goes down, and eventually I decide to send out Piloswine because I know Earthquake should be able to take down both of his Pokemon, go for Ice Beam into Cast Form, taking it down to low red, and then I go for Earthquake, even though Walrein will probably go down here. Oh, well that's very unfortunate. A crit Flamethrower is able to take down Piloswine, I go for another Ice Beam to finish off Cast Form, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Starmie. Unfortunately, it is definitely going to be able to outspeed everything I have. So Shadow Storm comes out, really not doing too much damage. Go for Thunderbolt into it, taking it down to half. Thunder Punch into Lapras, lucky no paralysis. Go for Body Slam, not enough to finish it off. I go for another Thunderbolt into it, and Starmie finishes off Walrein with a Shadow Break. I send out Dewgong, and Thunderbolt takes down the Starmie, and then all that's left is the Metang, which even though it does have super effective Thunder Punch, that's really all it's got, and it's not doing that much damage. I go for Ice Beam into it, and get a lucky freeze. So at this point, I just slowly whittle it down, and there was no real reason to use Helping Hand and Ice Beam, but anyway, I take it down, and we beat Snaddle on the first attempt. So now moving on to Ardos, he leads with a Shadow Swallow and Alakazam, and unfortunately, I'm going to be outsped by both of them, and even worse, Swallow's going for Shadow Half, having all the Pokemon's HP on the field, and Alakazam nearly takes down Lapras with a single Thunder Punch. Then out comes Kingdra. I go for Ice Beam to finish off the Swallow, then out comes Heracross, which I need to get rid of right away because it does have super effective damage with Brick Break, and it deals a lot of damage, taking Walrein down from half health. I decide to send out Dewgong because it is one of the bulkier Pokemon I have, but Double Edge from Kingdra actually does quite a bit to it as well. Brick Break finishes off Dewgong. I send out Jynx, hoping that I'll be able to outspeed it maybe. Lapras goes down, so I send out Piloswine, which is very necessary for the next Pokemon coming out. I go for Psychic, which unfortunately doesn't take it down, though it is good to know that Jynx outspeeds. Brick Break nearly takes down Piloswine in a single hit. Ancient Power finishes off Heracross, and then out comes his next Shadow Pokemon, Shadow Electabuzz. And this is where I need Piloswine. Unfortunately, it goes down to a Shadow Storm, and Jynx follows with it. I send out my final Pokemon, Cloyster, and it takes half its health in Double Edge. Now, you might notice something, and that is the fact that Cloyster is only level 27, which is partly why it's not doing too well. So I decide to go over to the Tutor Lady, and I go ahead and teach it Self-Destruct to help it do a bit more damage whenever it comes in. So now on the third attempt, I decide to lead Dewgong and Walrein, and I go for Helping Hand. That way I can guarantee that Body Slam takes down Alakazam in a single hit, because otherwise it does survive on just a bit of HP. He then sends out Kingdra, the Fruity Pebbles rain down, and now I go for another Helping Hand and Ice Beam into Kingdra to take it down in a single hit. Unfortunately, this does require the luck of both of his Pokemon, which luckily does happen, so I'm able to survive and go for Ice Beam taking down the Kingdra. Then he sends out the Heracross once again, definitely one of the biggest threats on his team. I decide to use Ice Beam with both, hoping to take down the Swallow. Shadow Break takes down Walrein, so I decide to send out Cloyster, and then Heracross hits Brick Break, taking Cloyster down in a single hit. So while it's not able to go boom, I am able to bring in a Pokemon that otherwise would have taken a lot of damage from the Brick Break. And then Fruity Pebbles go around. Swallow is taken down to low yellow with Ice Beam. I go for Helping Hand, and Swallow uses Shadow Break. Unfortunately, going for Lapras, but Dewgong does get taken down by Brick Break. I send out Jynx now. Ice Beam is able to take Heracross down low, and now I just need a bit of luck. That way the Swallow doesn't take down Jynx on this turn. Luckily, it just decides to go for Shadow Half, so Jynx is able to get by and use Psychic to finish off the Heracross, getting a crit, though it definitely wasn't necessary. And then out comes the Shadow Electabuzz once again. Go for Ice Beam into Swallow, taking it down. And now that the Electabuzz is paired with Snorlax, it shouldn't be a threat, at least for a moment. So I decide to go for Fake Tears into Snorlax, that way I can start lowering its special defense, allowing the rest of my team to start dealing damage to it, and Jynx goes down to a Shadow End, though it does have Snorlax's HP, which is good. With Electabuzz being out with Snorlax, it's just going to be going for Shadow Mist, which means that Piloswine is completely safe to just go for Earthquake, which will take it down as well as take down the Snorlax as well. So with that, I'm able to get past Ardos on the third attempt, and now we move on to Gorgon. He leads with a Slowking and an Ursaring, and on the first turn the Ursaring is going to go for Protect. So I go for Thunderbolt into the Slowking, taking it down nearly to half, and I go for Ancient Power, just to deal a bit more. Piloswine actually gets the Omni Boost once again, and I go for Protect and Earthquake, which should be enough to take down the Slowking now, and Ursaring takes quite a bit from it as well. Then out comes Aggron. Brick Break luckily into the Lapras, so it doesn't take any damage. Go for Ancient Power, which is able to take down the Ursaring, bringing out his next Pokemon, Walrein, which, hello other Walrein. I go for Ice Beam into Aggron, not really doing that much damage, though it doesn't really matter too much. I go for Thunderbolt into Walrein, and Ancient Power, which doesn't really do as much as I was hoping, but Thunderbolt does take it down to low red. It goes for Earthquake, and now on the following turn I go for Protect and Earthquake myself, which is able to take down the Aggron in a single hit, and finish off the Walrein, which sends out his two Shadow Pokemon, Shadow Poliwrath, and Shadow Mr. Mime. And even though Mr. Mime is a pretty strong special attacker, it's not actually all that dangerous until Shadow Sky is set up, and luckily the Poliwrath is slower than it, so it is going to be using a much weaker Shadow Storm before the Shadow Sky is set up. Unfortunately, I'm not quite able to take it down in a single turn. So it is still going to be able to hit me with the stronger variant, but luckily Lapras survives on just a little bit of HP left. I decide to swap into Cloyster, go for Thunderbolt to start dealing damage to Poliwrath, Okay, definitely not the best choice there. Though I still do have most of my team, I decided to send out Jynx and Walrein. Jynx should be able to outspeed the Mr. Mime, so I can go for Psychic to take down the Poliwrath, and then all that's left is the Mr. Mime, which while it is hitting very hard, it's not quite enough to finish this off, and Body Slam finishes it off. So with that, we beat Gorgon, and now we move on to Eldis, who leads with a Shadow Manectric and Ninjask. I go for Protect on the first turn, but Ninjask decides to go for Silver Wind into Piloswine. I go for Earthquake, not quite enough to take down Manectric though, that is very unfortunate. So I'm going to have to use a turn taking it down, and I decide to have Piloswine do the job, and luckily Quick Claw activates so I'm able to outspeed and take it down. Unfortunately, I had Lapras use Rain Dance this turn. Had I had it use Ice Beam, I could have taken down Salamence on the same turn, but I did want to get rid of the Shadow Sky, and Quick Claw isn't all that reliable, so I think I still, even though it's not the most efficient play, was probably still the best play. Anyway, I go for Ice Beam on this turn, taking down Salamence, and then out comes his next Pokemon, which is a Flygon. And it too is 4 times weak to ice, so I know I can take it down in a single hit. And luckily the Pokemon that follows is also weak to ice, so I can just go for double Ice Beam, taking down the Flygon. And then when he sends out his Shadow Marowak, I can hit it with super effective damage as well. Which is enough to take it down, and so he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Lapras. Hello there, Lapras. Now I decide to go for Thunderbolt into it and finish off the Ninjask with Ice Beam, because it's not really going to be doing much here anymore, and I just don't really want it around. So with Ninjask down, all that's left is the Lapras, who sets up Shadow Sky, and the funny thing about Pokemon that set up weather effects, most of the time they really want them up. So I can set up Rain Dance, and once it uses a single Shadow Storm, it's going to try to set up Shadow Sky once again, so it's not really a threat on this turn. However, it also got paralyzed, so it didn't really end up mattering. But anyway, Eldis is defeated, and we now move on to the big box legendary Shabalgia. And honestly, it shouldn't really be too much of a threat because I do have super effective damage on all my Pokemon. Ice Beam really isn't doing that much damage though. A second Ice Beam, taking it down below half. I go for Protect, and luckily Lugia decides to attack Lapras, and one last Ice Beam takes it down. So with that, we move on to the final boss of the game, Greevil, who leads with a Shadow Rhydon and Moltres. And I go for Thunderbolt and Ice Beam into it, though using Electric-type moves is always a bit risky because it's a 50-50 chance on whether or not Rhydon has Lightning Rod or Rock Head, but in this case it doesn't have Lightning Rod, so I'm able to attack the Moltres. And this is where I think having Water Gun would have been very nice, because once I set up the Rain, it would have been doing quite a bit more damage. But anyway, he sends out Executor, and I should be able to take them both down in a single Ice Beam, which Rhydon goes down, sending out Shadow Tauros, and then Executor goes down to a single Ice Beam as well, sending out his second of the legendary birds, Articuno, and it has a fairly good special defense stat, so it might be hard for my ice types to actually get past it, and it's even dealing quite a bit of damage as well. Go for Thunderbolt, taking it down about a third, and Ice Beam gets a crit, taking it down in a single hit. Okay, that is very nice. And then out comes his final Pokemon, which is Zapdos. Now, there is a good chance that Tauros will finish off one of my Pokemon if Zapdos doesn't do the job by itself. I decide to send out Dewgong, and yeah, Tauros just goes for Shadow Rush, but luckily it decided not to attack the Walrein. The Zapdos is taken down very low, and Walrein runs out of Ice Beam PP, so I'm forced to use Body Slam. Dewgong goes down to a Shadow Bolt. I send out Cloyster. Shadow Rush hits Cloyster, not quite enough to take it down. Body Slam doesn't take down the Zapdos, which is extremely unfortunate. I go for Aurora Beam into the Zapdos. Walrein goes down to a Shadow Bolt. I send out Piloswine, and Tauros hits a Shadow Rush, taking Cloyster down to 1 HP because of the 10% focus band, so it's able to survive, though it does go down to the Fruity Pebbles right after. I send out Jynx, which unfortunately might not be able to outspeed Tauros. It doesn't. It goes down in a single hit, and then all that's left is Piloswine. I go for Charm to lower its attack, and I go for Earthquake, which really isn't doing that much damage. It's forced to set up Shadow Sky again because it ended, and it goes for Shadow Hold, wasting another turn. I go for another Earthquake, taking it down to yellow, and it hits its Shadow Rush, still doing nearly half my health, so as long as it doesn't get a crit, I think I win. It hits another Shadow Rush, taking me down to 20, and Ancient Power finishes it off. So with that, we're able to beat Greevil on the first attempt. So with that, let's see how well the ice types did. They beat the game at a time of 14 hours, 16 minutes, and 44 seconds, with 11 faints throughout the game, 8 of those being to bosses, and 3 of those being to random trainers. So while I do think that the ice type is pretty good in this game, considering that it didn't really lose too much and it did well throughout most of the game, it does have some problems. The biggest of which is, surprisingly, not the fact that the ice type is bad defensively, because honestly they did pretty good in that department. No, I think it's really that none of them are extremely offensive. Jynx is probably the closest to that, having a 100 base special attack stat, which is very good. But unfortunately, whenever you have Jynx out, it's probably going down to a single hit or two anyway, so it's only going to be taking down a single Pokemon before it itself goes down, making itself a bit neutral. But the thing is I'm not trying to say that the ice type is weak, because obviously a lot of the Pokemon there have attack and special attack stats between 80 and 100, so obviously they're not weak. But that ties into the second issue, and that's that most of the ice types are in the slow level up group. And this isn't something I have really thought about too much whenever doing these team battles, but having Pokemon that eat a lot of experience to be viable later in the game can cause a lot of slowdown, because you're having to do extra battles just to get them to those higher levels. Now luckily the EXP share is available right after Sneasle, but it really is a band-aid on a much bigger issue that definitely slows down some of the better Pokemon types. So with all the negatives out of the way, let's go over the positives. I think that the ice typing does very well against the last area of the game, only really having issues with Ardos, which is completely understandable because many of his Pokemon are very fast, and those that aren't hit very hard. And on top of that, they actually just do great against most of the general trainer fights, so there's no real slowdown between boss battles, which is very nice. So with that being said, they do find themselves in the C tier, right above the bug types, and with that, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!